Mapleview, Ohio sat like a postcard, static, composed, and too perfect to question. It was the kind of place where people still waved to each other from porches, where lawns were trimmed with military precision, and where news traveled not through headlines but through whispers at the grocery store. The kind of place that seemed designed to repel tragedy. With only 12,000 residents, it was a town small enough for everyone to know each other, and just big enough for someone like Hannah Rader to disappear in plain sight. Hannah's world was quieter than most. She spoke little, reacted less, and never stayed long in a room full of people. She had been this way for as long as anyone could remember. The waitresses at the diner where she worked said she moved like a shadow, always there and yet somehow not. She filled coffee cups and wiped counters, clocked in, clocked out, and disappeared back into her private orbit. Most customers didn't even know her name. The regulars called her the silent one or the girl with the gray eyes. She wasn't unfriendly, she simply never invited conversation. Behind the closed door of her grandmother's home on Sycamore Street, a small white clapboard house with peeling blue shutters, Hannah lived a life of eerie stillness. Her room was sparse. A mattress on the floor, stacks of worn books, a lamp with no shade, and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. A single teddy bear, threadbare and missing one eye, sat by the window untouched. She had never redecorated since childhood. There was no music, no posters, no sign of a teenager growing into adulthood. Just the suffocating presence of time that had stopped moving a decade ago. The reason why no one saw this coming lies buried in the past. A past stitched together with silence and neglect. Hannah's father, Daniel Rader, had returned from Afghanistan a changed man. He was quiet, tense, prone to sudden absences that lasted days. Then, one winter morning when Hannah was just 6 years old, he locked himself in the garage with the engine running. The police called it carbon monoxide poisoning. Margaret called it cowardice. Hannah didn't call it anything. She stood in the snow outside the garage door for hours, waiting for him to come out. Her mother, Leanne, couldn't handle what was left behind. A few weeks after the funeral, she packed a duffel bag, left a short note on the kitchen counter, and disappeared into the fog. The note simply read, "She's better off with you. I can't do this." She never returned. With both parents gone, Hannah became the ward of her grandmother, a stern woman in her 70s who believed in routine and silence more than affection. She didn't hug, she didn't soothe. She fed Hannah and clothed her, but never once asked her how she was coping. Grief was something to be buried, not discussed. At school, Hannah blended into the background. Her attendance was irregular. She rarely answered questions in class and avoided eye contact with both students and teachers. When forced to speak, she would lower her head and whisper just enough to be heard. Most peers dismissed her as weird. A few mocked her for the secondhand clothes she wore. Others didn't even notice her presence. She ate lunch alone, walked home alone, and when group projects came around, teachers would assign her to teams that didn't want her. Nobody invited her to birthday parties. Nobody asked her to prom. Her academic record showed a bright but disengaged mind. Her test scores were above average, but her participation was non-existent. Guidance counselors noted concerning emotional withdrawal and potential for depressive episodes, but the town's school system, underfunded and overworked, filed her away like dozens of other quiet kids. There was no follow-up, no intervention. No one asked if she needed help. Hannah's only expression was in her notebooks, thick spirals of yellowed paper where she scrawled jagged shapes, chaotic maps, lists of names, imaginary timelines, and strange words repeated like incantations. Her writing grew more cryptic over time, filled with phrases like erase the echo and reset the pattern. At home, her only conversations were with Margaret, who treated her more like a tenant than a granddaughter. Their interactions were limited to chores, meals, and strict expectations. Hannah was not allowed to date. She was forbidden from using the internet for anything beyond school. She had no phone until she turned 17, and even then, it was a prepaid flip phone with no data. Every night, she ate dinner in silence across from a woman who had lost all softness, chewing through meatloaf and mashed potatoes like they were obligations. In that environment, emotions dried up. They were luxuries no one could afford. By the time Hannah was 18, she no longer resembled the shy girl who once sat cross-legged on her kindergarten rug. Her features had hardened. Her frame had narrowed into something sharp and severe. Her hair was always pulled back into a tight braid, and she wore the same rotation of clothes: oversized sweaters, jeans, and black boots. She stopped watching television. She no longer read books. Instead, she spent hours in her room staring out the window or scribbling in her notebooks, which she kept hidden under the mattress. When Margaret once asked what she was writing, Hannah lied and said it was poetry. There were signs, of course, subtle, scattered signs that something was brewing under her surface. She asked unusual questions at the diner, once inquiring how fast the police could respond to a silent alarm. She began taking walks late at night, pacing the abandoned soccer fields on the edge of town for hours. One local, Charlie Whitaker, saw her one evening standing on the train tracks just outside the station. When he called out to her, she turned and walked away without a word. He never told anyone. He didn't think it was important. No one ever saw her cry. Not at her father's funeral, not when the guidance counselor called her in after a student accused her of self-harm, not even when she was suspended for skipping too many classes. There was a void where her feelings should have been, a quiet, dangerous void that no one dared to enter. Over time, the town simply forgot about her. She became part of the background, like the cracked sidewalk outside the pharmacy or the broken vending machine at the bus station. Present but invisible. That invisibility became the shell that housed her rage. Years of being unheard, unloved, unacknowledged, turned inward until it formed something cold and methodical. She was no longer a child seeking comfort. She was a ghost learning how to haunt. In a town that celebrated cheeriness and punished discomfort, Hannah learned to smile only in private, and when she did, it never reached her eyes. By the end of 2024, she had quit school completely. She took extra shifts at the diner, said even less than before, and began spending her weekends traveling by bus to other towns, where she could move anonymously. She rented shooting lanes at nearby gun ranges under false names, using the ID of a cousin who had died years earlier in a car crash. She read manuals, watched training videos, and documented her progress meticulously. She wasn't reckless, she was preparing. And still, no one noticed. Mapleview had trained itself to look away from discomfort, and in doing so, it failed to see the storm gathering in the quiet girl with the gray eyes. By the time Hannah Rader turned 18, the transformation was complete. Whatever fragments of social routine remained in her life dissolved without protest. She stopped attending church with her grandmother, ignoring the disapproving silence that followed. The old wooden pew at St. Agnes, where she used to sit stiffly beside Margaret every Sunday, remained empty. No one asked why. No one called to check. When she formally dropped out of school, it raised no alarms. Her grades had already slipped into quiet failure, and her name, long absent from school events or clubs, was quietly removed from the attendance sheet. It was easier for the system to let her fade out than to ask what went wrong. Hannah's days became structured only by her inner clock. She stayed awake through the night, her window light sometimes glowing past 3 or 4 in the morning. Her grandmother never questioned it. As long as Hannah made her own meals and didn't bring trouble to the doorstep, Margaret left her alone. The silence between them was absolute, and in that silence, Hannah spiraled. Her computer became her only connection to the outside world. She didn't use it for the usual distractions that other girls her age might indulge in. No social media, no music, no lighthearted videos. Instead, her browser history began to form a deeply disturbing tapestry of rage. She dove into obscure message boards where violent ideologies festered unchecked. She read manifestos of past shooters. She compiled detailed files of mass killings in American schools. She wasn't merely curious, she was studying. She mapped timelines, took notes on response times, memorized layouts of school buildings. She created color-coded spreadsheets of body counts and tactical failures. To her, it was all data, cold, clinical, methodical. Videos of surveillance footage from Columbine and Sandy Hook were played repeatedly. She tracked gun models, attack strategies, psychological profiles, and emergency call lags. The events at Robb Elementary in Uvalde particularly consumed her. She downloaded police transcripts and victim lists. She traced the chronology of each shooting, not in horror, but with fascination. Her obsession didn't stem from admiration. It came from a desperate attempt to understand something broken within herself. Every article she read, every video she analyzed, added another layer to the illusion of control. In a world where she had none, this was something she could grasp. As winter passed into spring, her behavior turned even more unsettling. Residents of Sycamore Street began to whisper about Hannah's nocturnal pacing. Neighbors walking their dogs at dusk spotted her drifting between trees in the woods behind her house, always alone, sometimes barefoot, her clothes damp with dew. She would walk in wide circles or stop and stand for minutes at a time, unmoving, staring toward her presence began to feel ominous, like a ghost haunting her own life. In March, Sheriff Walter Briggs received a quiet report from a gun range owner in a neighboring county. A young woman matching Hannah's description had been frequenting the range under the name Kayla Rader. She was meticulous, they said. She didn't chat. She didn't flinch. Her form was precise, she fired with intensity and never asked for instruction. When they asked for ID, she handed over a Connecticut driver's license, an outdated one it turned out, belonging to her cousin who had left Ohio years before. But it looked real enough and no one questioned it. No one cross-referenced it. The sale of the Ruger AR-556 was processed without delay. Over the next several weeks, Hannah began acquiring the rest of what she needed. Through private sellers and online orders sent to mail drops, she obtained ammunition, tactical gloves, and a black duffel bag. She recorded videos of herself reloading in her bedroom, timing each attempt to the second. She read documents on trauma ballistics and exit wound patterns. She practiced her breathing. She rehearsed her movement through narrow hallways. She had reduced the act to choreography, not an outburst, a procedure. And then the moment came, a seemingly insignificant encounter that, in retrospect, cracked the final sliver of restraint. At the local grocery store while picking up canned soup, she brushed shoulders with a mother and child in one of the aisles. The mother turned, looked her over, and with a forced smile said, "You'd be prettier if you smiled more." It was a throwaway remark, one of 1,000 micro-interactions that happened daily. But for Hannah, it wasn't small. It was the echo of everything she had been told to hide, to mute, to smother since she was a child. Her response was not visible. She didn't lash out, didn't speak. But that night, something shifted irrevocably. Her internet history showed the change with brutal clarity. She stopped reading about past shootings and began researching Mapleview Kindergarten directly. She found the floor plan uploaded on a public zoning board file from years ago. She downloaded it and printed several copies. She studied morning drop-off times, discovered that staff arrived at staggered intervals, and learned which days deliveries were made to the back kitchen door. She created hand-drawn maps with annotations like line of sight and delayed response zone. She compiled a roster of staff from LinkedIn profiles and school newsletters, matching names to faces, noting classroom locations. She tracked weather forecasts for the upcoming week, searching for sunny mornings when children would be outside. Her journals, already dense with cryptic language, grew more frantic. Over 13 pages, a single phrase was repeated like a mantra. "I was never a child." The handwriting began neat, then deteriorated into uneven, almost carved lettering. She wasn't just mourning a stolen childhood, she was condemning it. She believed that the world had denied her something essential, and that its innocence was a lie. Her logic, twisted as it was, reached the conclusion that if she had never been a child, then neither should anyone else. There was no room left for mercy in her reasoning. The future had calcified. By early May, she had memorized every corridor, door latch, and blind spot of the kindergarten. She visited the school twice in the early hours before dawn, circling the perimeter under the pretense of walking to the nearby park. No one questioned a girl out for a walk. No one stopped her. She moved with the calm of someone who had already accepted what she was about to do. There was no hesitation left, only schedule. And all the while, Mapleview slept, oblivious. The children practiced spring songs, the teachers prepared for end-of-year projects, parents planned field trips and packed lunches. The town continued to smile, unaware that Hannah Rader was no longer among them. Not in spirit, not in conscience. She had crossed a line in silence, and there would be no return. The sun rose gently over Mapleview on Tuesday, May 17th, casting warm, golden light across the quiet streets, as if nothing in the world was amiss. Birds chirped on telephone wires, sprinklers clicked to life on front lawns. It was the kind of morning parents dream about, clear, calm, and full of routine. The school drop-off line at Mapleview Kindergarten was already forming by 7:45 a.m., a steady procession of idling minivans, hurried goodbyes, and tiny hands waving through backseat windows. Children wearing backpacks shaped like ladybugs and dinosaurs bounded toward the school entrance, unaware that a carefully crafted nightmare had already begun to unfold. Inside, the building buzzed with life. Miss Natalie Decker, a young teacher in room A3, was pouring bright tempera paints into shallow trays, preparing for the morning's art project, Draw Your Dream Home. She had stayed up late the night before cutting out stencils of houses and trees. In the hallway, other teachers were finishing bulletin board decorations, chatting about the upcoming end-of-year picnic. The smell of toast and fruit drifted from the cafeteria. The school's rhythm was steady, predictable, safe. Or so it seemed. At exactly 8:23 a.m., unnoticed by staff, Hannah Rader slipped through the back kitchen door, dressed in a borrowed maintenance uniform. The entrance was unlocked, just as she had predicted, timed precisely with the morning food delivery schedule. She wore black gloves and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. In her right hand, she gripped the duffel bag tightly against her chest, the weight of it balanced from hours of practice. Her walk was calm, measured. She moved past the stacked crates of milk and fruit without a glance. The hallway was empty. She stopped just before the central corridor, took a shallow breath, and unzipped the duffel. Inside was the Ruger AR-556, loaded and ready. She had already chambered a round the night before. Her first shot didn't aim at anyone. She fired into the ceiling, splintering the tiles above and triggering the fire alarm. Screams echoed through the hallway almost instantly as lights flashed red and the siren blared. The chaos she'd studied for years was real now, filling the school with noise and confusion. But what followed wasn't chaos on her part. It was execution. Hannah moved methodically down the corridor, stopping at each classroom door with calculated precision. She shot through glass panels when the doors were locked, pushed through when they weren't. Children screamed and scattered. Teachers yelled for their students to hide. She fired without pause, targeting movement, aiming low where the children ran and ducked. In room C1, she stepped over overturned chairs to reach the far corner where several kids huddled behind a reading station. She reloaded quickly, without fumbling, and continued. By 8:28 a.m., 3 classrooms had been struck. The fire alarm, still blaring, had caused panic among nearby teachers who thought it was a drill gone wrong. In room B4, a teacher named Mr. Aaron Joseph barricaded the door with a table and locked his students in the supply closet. Hannah tried to break the door's lock with her shoulder, then moved on. Her aim wasn't to be stalled. It was to reach as many rooms as possible in the shortest time. The building's custodian, Jeremy Flint, had been mopping near the front lobby when he heard the first shot. A veteran of the Navy and a beloved figure at the school, Jeremy reacted without hesitation. Grabbing the metal mop handle, he sprinted toward the hallway and turned the corner just as Hannah emerged from room A5. Without waiting for an explanation, without speaking, he lunged at her with the mop raised like a spear. She didn't flinch. 2 shots rang out. Jeremy collapsed immediately, his blood pooling beneath him. His sacrifice would later be honored as an act of heroism, but in that moment, it was just another interruption in her sequence. Outside, panicked parents who had not yet left the parking lot began calling 911. Inside, teachers frantically tried to keep doors locked, whispering to children to stay quiet, stay still, don't move. The school's intercom crackled once but remained silent, likely shorted by the alarm system. Emergency services were dispatched at 8:29 a.m. The first patrol car arrived 7 minutes later. At 8:36 a.m., police entered the building through the main entrance, sweeping hallways with drawn weapons. They followed the sound of gunfire to the east wing, where Hannah had already forced her way into room B2. This was where she stopped. Perhaps she ran out of ammunition, or perhaps she had chosen this as her endpoint all along. She shut the door behind her, stacked 2 tables against it, and sat down in the center of the room on the rainbow alphabet rug. Around her lay a scene too horrifying to immediately process. Several children lay motionless, crayons still clutched in small hands, paint trays overturned. A butterfly poster on the wall fluttered in the forced air from the vent, undisturbed by the devastation. Hannah placed the rifle beside her and sat cross-legged, hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door. Her breathing slowed. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She waited. When the tactical team breached the classroom door at 8:39 a.m., they found her just like that, calm, silent, unarmed. She didn't move as officers shouted commands. They tackled her to the ground, zip-tied her wrists, and carried her out past the chaos she had caused. One officer later reported that as she was being lifted to her feet, she whispered a single sentence: "I fixed it." By 9:00 IEM, the building had been evacuated. Medics swarmed the site. The dead and wounded were identified, carried out one by one, many still in their pajamas, covered in stickers and finger paint. The scale of the horror would not be fully known until the end of the day, when authorities confirmed that 38 children had died, along with 3 staff members. It became the deadliest school shooting in Ohio's history and one of the most devastating mass killings ever carried out by a female perpetrator in the United States. The sun continued to shine that day in Mapleview, casting long shadows across the police tape and abandoned backpacks. Helicopters circled overhead. News vans lined the streets. Parents clutched photographs of their children, desperate for answers, for hope, for anything. But for many, there was only silence. Hannah Rader was placed in the back of a squad car and driven away, her face blank, her eyes unreadable. No tears, no emotion, just the eerie stillness of a girl who had planned everything and believed somewhere in the tangled recesses of her mind that what she had done was not a crime, but a correction. The trial of Hannah Rader unfolded under the weight of a nation's disbelief. It wasn't just another courtroom drama. It was a confrontation with a reality no one wanted to face, that a 19-year-old girl, born and raised in a quiet Ohio town, had carried out one of the deadliest school shootings in American history. When she was led into the Franklin County Courthouse on the first day of proceedings, the atmosphere in the room seemed to tighten. She was pale, thin, and expressionless, her wrists shackled in front of her, her gaze lowered. Cameras clicked, journalists whispered, and rows of parents in the gallery sat stone-faced, waiting to see whether this girl, this ghost of a person, would show even a flicker of remorse. The lead prosecutor, Danielle Morris, stood before the court and called it plainly: this is not just about violence. This is about erasure, a deliberate, cold act meant to steal from us our future. She was composed but visibly exhausted. For 6 weeks, she would lead a team that presented over 70 pieces of evidence, including forensic analysis, surveillance footage, and Hannah's own journal entries. They called witnesses, survivors, first responders, educators, medical experts. Each one brought more weight to an already unbearable reality. The courtroom became a space of ritualized mourning, where each fact laid bare another layer of suffering. Miss Natalie Decker, the kindergarten teacher who had been shot in the back and was now confined to a wheelchair, gave her testimony on the 3rd day. She arrived supported by her brother and wheeled to the stand in silence. Her voice trembled as she described the moment the door burst open, the children screaming, the flash of the rifle. She broke down, recalling the chaos, how she couldn't protect them, how she still hears the gunfire in her sleep. Her tears filled the courtroom with a quiet that nothing else could. Even the defense remained still. There was no way to soften what had been done. Parents were next. Some chose not to speak, unable to face their daughter's or son's killer. Others stood with trembling papers in their hands, reading statements filled with anguish, memories, and unanswered questions. One mother recounted the birthday party planned for the weekend after the shooting, the unopened presents, the cake that never left the fridge. Another father described how his 4-year-old shoes were never found, as if their child had been lifted away from this world entirely. There were no objections, no interruptions, just the long, brutal testimony of grief. The most chilling moment, however, came not from the witnesses, but from Hannah herself. Or rather, from her silence. She refused to testify. She sat through each day of the trial with the same detached presence that had marked her arrest. Her eyes rarely met anyone's. She did not flinch when the footage from the body cams was shown. Though the sound was removed out of respect for the victims' families, the images alone were enough to cause gasps and audible sobs in the courtroom. One father had to be escorted out after collapsing. Hannah remained unmoved, almost inhuman in her stillness. Her defense attorney, Michael Hayes, took a different approach. He did not argue insanity, nor did he attempt to excuse the horror. Instead, he tried to draw a portrait of who Hannah had been before the massacre. A neglected child, a forgotten teenager, a young woman with untreated trauma and isolation so deep it had curdled into something monstrous. She was not delusional, Hayes said during his opening remarks. She was simply done living, and when someone decides they no longer belong in the world, sometimes they try to take the world with them. It was a bleak explanation, not a justification. But even that, for most in the room, was too much mercy. The prosecution countered swiftly, showing pages from Hannah's journals, obsessive notes about floor plans, shooting strategies, quotes from other mass murderers scrawled in red ink. They played portions of her practice videos where she timed herself loading magazines, reviewed hallway diagrams, and rehearsed every step of her attack. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a blueprint. The jury listened. For 41 days, they absorbed the evidence, the pain, the relentless procession of shattered lives. They were not allowed to cry in front of the court, but some later admitted they did when no one was watching. It took them less than 5 hours to reach a decision. On October 12, 2025, the Franklin County Court found Hannah Rader guilty on 76 counts, including murder, attempted murder, and terrorism. The courtroom did not cheer. There was no applause. The moment passed like a breath held too long. Release without relief. The judge postponed sentencing by 2 days, allowing the families to prepare their final statements. On October 14, 2025, Hannah Rader was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. There were no dramatic outbursts, no tears from the convicted. She stood as the sentence was read, her face blank, her eyes dull. It was over. The verdict marked a legal conclusion, but the emotional reckoning had no such end. Hannah was immediately transferred to a high-security facility where she would remain in solitary confinement. She would spend 23 hours a day alone in a cell, her only view the gray concrete walls that now match the color of her eyes. There would be no appeals, no interviews, no books written from prison. Her story had no sequel, only echoes. For the families, justice was a hollow word. It could not bring back their children. It could not erase the image of a little desk left unfilled, a lunchbox that was never unpacked. For the town of Mapleview, the trial's conclusion did not signal closure, but the beginning of a long, painful journey of remembrance. And for Hannah Rader, there was no redemption, only the slow, deliberate passing of time, measured in isolation and silence. Mapleview, once known for its annual strawberry festivals, manicured lawns, and the unshakable sense of small-town safety, is no longer recognizable to those who remember it before May 17th. The transformation is not physical, though subtle signs remain, but spiritual, emotional, buried in the way people look at each other and the silences that hang too long in casual conversations. The change lingers in the lowered voices at grocery stores, the hesitations before sending children to school, and the way eyes flicker toward the kindergarten building that now stands shuttered, boarded, and slowly decaying behind a chain-link fence wrapped in faded police tape. No one goes near it. Even the wind seems to hush as it passes. The school, once filled with color and chaos, was closed indefinitely just days after the massacre. No staff returned. No children were reassigned to nearby districts immediately. The district released a statement calling the closure a temporary measure, but that term was quickly understood to mean permanent in everything but legal language. Inside, the walls still bear the murals painted by students, trees with handprint leaves, smiling suns, alphabets spelled out in marker. But those bright images now exist only in a building frozen in time and grief. Windows remain boarded, blinds drawn, doors padlocked. The building has become a memorial to absence. At first, the community responded with collective mourning. A row of 38 white wooden crosses, handmade by a retired carpenter, appeared on the front lawn of the school just days after the crime. Each bore a child's name written in black paint, surrounded by stuffed animals, school photos, paper flowers, and notes written in childish scrawl. For weeks, families and strangers alike came in waves, leaving candles and drawings, quietly crying together and apart. At night, volunteers lit small lanterns that cast an orange glow over the crosses, as if trying to protect the innocents already lost. But time, as it always does, moved forward, awkwardly, painfully. The temporary memorial eventually gave way to something more permanent. A granite monument carved with all 38 names. It stands now in the center of what used to be the playground, at the foot of the slide, where laughter once echoed and children chased each other without fear. The jungle gym is rusting. The swings have been removed. The chalk drawings on the pavement have long since washed away. The silence there is not peaceful, it is suffocating. 3 weeks after Hannah Rader was sentenced to life in prison, a fire broke out on Sycamore Street. It began just after midnight, flames pouring from the rear of the Rader residence, the same home where Hannah had spent her final years of preparation. Despite the rapid arrival of fire crews, the structure was fully engulfed by the time they could respond. The blaze gutted the house, leaving only the brick foundation and a charred skeleton of walls. No accelerants were officially found. No suspects were arrested, but no one in Mapleview was surprised. Whispers of arson passed quietly through the town, always with the same undertone. Someone had done what needed to be done. Margaret Rader, who had lived in that house for decades, vanished soon after the fire. Some claimed she left on a bus to Toledo. Others said she moved in with distant relatives in Kentucky. There were rumors she had changed her name and was living under a false identity in a small town in Indiana, but none of it was ever confirmed. Her house was gone, her granddaughter imprisoned, and the town had made it clear her presence was no longer welcome. In Mapleview's collective psyche, she became a symbol of the past everyone wanted to forget. The survivors, those few children and staff members who had lived through the shooting, carry wounds no therapy can reach. Despite being hailed as heroes, most live in states of chronic fear. Some children stop speaking altogether. Others refuse to enter buildings with loud bells or wear backpacks. One girl insists on checking under every desk before sitting down. Therapists in the area report long-term PTSD, survivor's guilt, recurring nightmares. But the waiting lists for treatment are long, and the funding stretched thin. A handful of teachers resigned not just from Mapleview, but from education entirely. They couldn't return to classrooms, any classrooms, without seeing flashes of that morning. Parents suffer in parallel silence. Many have moved away, but most remain, tethered to memories and mourning. For them, the pain isn't just the absence of a child, it's the constant presence of what should have been. Report cards never filled, birthdays uncelebrated, bikes untouched, rooms left intact as if any moment the door might open and the laughter return. Their grief is not explosive, it is enduring, like a low-grade fever that never breaks. Some formed advocacy groups, speaking at town halls, writing letters to lawmakers, trying to find meaning in the ruins. Others withdrew, avoiding the media, rejecting interviews, unwilling to have their pain turned into headlines. The massacre in Mapleview quickly became a national symbol, used in political speeches, policy debates, and ideological battles. News outlets swarmed the town for weeks. Pundits argued over gun control laws, mental health services, and juvenile sentencing guidelines. Talk radio speculated on motive and failure. Presidential candidates name-dropped Mapleview in stump speeches, each trying to leverage the tragedy for their agenda. Bills were proposed and blocked. Experts argued on television about red flags, response times, background checks, but none of that mattered to the people who had tucked their children into bed on May 16th and never got the chance to do it again. The town became a cautionary tale. Its name, once known only to locals, was now included in lists alongside Columbine, Sandy Hook, and Uvalde. Security protocols across Ohio schools were revised in response. Doors were reinforced, entry systems updated, drills intensified. But for Mapleview, the measures came too late. The damage had been done, not just to lives but to the town's identity. It could never again be the sleepy Ohio community it once was. It had been marked, and beneath the national discourse, the core truth remained. No law, no policy, no monument could bring back the 38 children who never made it to first grade. They remain forever 5-6 years old, their futures unfulfilled, their seats permanently empty. They are the echo that haunts every classroom in Mapleview. The story does not end. It lingers in the pauses, in the unfinished sentences, in the way people say, since the tragedy, instead of naming it. In Mapleview, the word kindergarten is no longer innocent. It is a scar. Years have passed since the morning that shattered Mapleview. But time has done little to erase the imprint left behind. The town continues to move forward. Children grow up, shops change hands, seasons come and go, but beneath the surface, nothing is truly the same. Some wounds are too deep to close. Some names are too heavy to say. Hannah Rader's name has become one such name. It is not spoken in public, not written in school records, not mentioned during town meetings or memorial services, yet everyone knows it. It lingers in pauses, in the careful phrasing people use when discussing the incident. It hovers in the air like a shadow that stretches across every hallway of the rebuilt elementary school, even though the new building stands on the opposite side of town. In Mapleview, there is no statue of her, no plaque, no trace in the local yearbooks or graduation programs. Her face has been erased, but her presence has not. She exists in the empty spaces. Every May 17, the town gathers. It begins just after sunset, as the sky fades from gold to gray. Parents, now older and more worn, arrive in silence, each holding a candle or a small toy. There are no invitations, no press, no political speeches, just an unspoken agreement among neighbors that remembering matters more than explaining. At the center of the memorial plaza, the names of the 38 children remain etched into granite. They are not arranged alphabetically, but by the room they were in, each one a part of the timeline that no one can forget. Flowers are placed gently at the base. Wind rustles the grass, and for an hour, sometimes more, the town simply stands together and remembers. Children too young to know what happened often come with questions. They see the candles, the tears, the solemn faces. They ask who the names belong to. Their parents glance at each other, searching for words, but rarely do they speak the full truth. Instead, they say things like, "There was an accident," or "They're angels now," or "Something very sad happened before you were born." The adults don't lie out of shame, they lie out of mercy. Because how do you explain that a girl not much older than a babysitter walked into a kindergarten and took all of that away? At the Marysville Correctional Institution, Hannah Rader still breathes. She is now 23. Her face has aged slightly, her hair grown out and grayer at the ends, though she's kept out of sight from everyone, even within the prison. Her cell is bare and narrow. Its cinder block walls the same color as the outside world that no longer claims her. She does not speak to guards. She does not speak to fellow inmates. She has refused every media request since her conviction, ignoring hundreds of letters from journalists, documentarians, and strangers seeking either redemption or clarity. No one knows what she thinks, if she thinks. She remains locked inside the same silence that surrounded her for years before the shooting. Only now, that silence is absolute. Institution staff describe her as compliant but inert. She eats what she's given, attends mandated checkups, and spends most of her time staring at the ceiling or scribbling in notebooks that no one is allowed to read. The few pages that were confiscated years ago contain geometric patterns, strange phrases, and lists of dates with no context. She has not written a confession. She has not apologized. Her legal team, now long dismissed, has not spoken of her in years. Her grandmother, whose name once appeared in public records, has been dead for some time. There are no visitors, no birthdays acknowledged. She exists as a number, not a name. In Mapleview, steps were taken to ensure her memory would not contaminate future generations. Her name was officially removed from school rosters. Old yearbooks were reprinted without her photograph. Digital archives were edited, her image blurred or replaced. Local libraries removed her from newspaper clippings. Online forums block posts containing her full name. The town has collectively agreed, consciously or not, that the best way to survive her is to erase her. But erasure is never clean. It leaves outlines, traces. Some people still argue about what she was. At local diners, in whispered conversations, theories surface and fade again. Some insist she was mentally ill, failed by the system. Others believe she was simply evil, born without empathy, a warning sign that was missed not because it was subtle, but because it was easy to ignore. A few quietly wonder if more could have been done, if a counselor had stepped in, if a neighbor had reached out, if the right words had been spoken at the right moment. But these thoughts don't last. They're buried, pushed down, because wondering means engaging, and engaging means remembering her not just as a monster, but as a girl. and no one in Mapleview wants to give her that anymore. Yet memory is stubborn. It lives not only in stone monuments but in habits, in fears passed on to children, in the way every school now drills lockdown procedures monthly. It lives in the discomfort parents feel when they see a quiet teenager sitting alone. It lives in the security cameras mounted in every hallway, in the locked doors, in the way teachers glance nervously at backpacks left unattended. Hannah Rader may be invisible in name, but her legacy is woven into the town's rituals, its education system, its laws. She changed everything, and not a single person in Mapleview would dare say otherwise. Each year, as the anniversary approaches, the same questions rise again. Has anything truly changed? Are children safer now? Can something like this ever be prevented completely? The answers never satisfy. They drift between policy and hope, between mourning and fear. What remains certain is that Mapleview remembers, not with speeches or signs, but with silence. It remembers in the way people cross the street a little faster when they near the old school grounds, in the way teachers linger in doorways, counting heads twice instead of once. It remembers in scars, in rituals, in empty chairs that no one dares remove. Hannah's name may never again be spoken at a podium or written on a plaque, but it doesn't need to be. It is etched into the collective memory of a town that learned the cost of silence too late. It is a name that lives in the spaces between words, in the breath people hold before they say May 17. It is not forgiven. It is not forgotten. It is a wound that never bled, only burned, and still burns quietly.